Hi there and welcome to Infogol's Premier League season preview. With me I have Mark Taylor. How are we doing, Mark?
Hi Jake.
Okay?
Yeah, fine.
Ready and raring for a new Premier League season?
A new Premier League season without Stoke in it, so yeah, that's fine.
And obviously everyone knows last year Manchester City absolutely ran away with the league title. We're going to go through team by team, assessing each team's performances over the last season and what we can expect from this season, and also providing our best bets. So starting, we're going in alphabetical order, so we'll start with Arsenal. Now there's all change at Arsenal this season for the first time in 20 years. Arsene Wenger will not be manager of Arsenal this season. Unai Emery is the man tasked with changing Arsenal's fortunes. Last season the process was pretty poor towards the end. Are we expecting Emery to improve Arsenal quite drastically, or will it be a slow progression?
Yeah, obviously Arsenal started off quite well. They were performing, at a top six level. They were scoring an average of about two expected goals per game. They were conceding about one expected goals per game, so it's a goal difference of one per game. And then after about 25-30 games, the wheels really came off, at least in the process. Although they were still getting results, they were performing as a pretty much a fifth, sixth, seventh best side in the Premier League. So something obviously had to change. The manager changed. Whether it's going to make a huge amount of difference in the first season, I noticed Arsenal are 20-1 to win the title, which is around about the odds they're typically quoted at. So Arsenal, from the days of being title contenders, are probably long gone.
Yeah, it will be hard to break that top four with the five teams that finish above them. They all look really strong again this season. But what Unai Emery will bring is a more pragmatic style. His signings, Lichtsteiner, Socrates, they're really hardened players. Something that many people would think Arsenal have lacked over the last few years. And I think he'll provide a structure, so it's definitely feasible to see an increase or an improvement, in Arsenal's performances this season. Bournemouth last season were far from impressive, and once again they managed to survive, but improvements are needed if they're to be more comfortable this time round.
Yeah, I mean it's very difficult once you get outside the top five, top six in the Premier League. Virtually any team could go down. It's only a 38 game season. It seems a long time when your team isn't winning, but 38 games isn't really long enough for teams to get the just desserts. So you can stay up without creating particularly great chances or allowing really lots of chances, and you can get relegated with a better process than that. Bournemouth were on par to replicate the kind of stats that Stoke and Swansea went down with, so it wouldn't have been a surprise to see Bournemouth be one of the sides relegated. There's no particular reason to suggest that they will particularly improve this year. So they are one of the teams that you would possibly be looking at to be fighting for their status.
Another team people might be looking at is Brighton. They deservedly stayed up last season. They had a very strong finish to the campaign, and most of that was probably down to how well they did at set pieces. Pascal Gross they brought in the summer, and his delivery was impeccable all season.
Yeah.
And that's probably something that they will need if they are to survive again.
Yeah, I mean they paid a fraction that Everton paid for Gifley Sigurdsson for a dead ball specialist who could deliver dangerous balls into the box, and they reaped the just desserts for doing their research, trying to buy an undervalued asset that it essentially helped them stay up. They took time to adjust in the Premier League as all teams do. It wouldn't have been any surprise again, after 20 odd games to see them relegated. They were struggling to prevent chances as all teams do when they come up, and struggling to create them. They improved, quite substantially in the final 10 games, and they were profiling as a fairly decent mid-table side. So you know, they've had a season, you know, in the Premier League, but it as I say, it's difficult for teams outside the top 5, top 6, where variance can get you relegated. So they're probably looking up, but they probably should be looking down as well.
And you mentioned variance, and one team that variance did work for last season was Burnley. They were a surprise package. Many had them as one of the favourites to be relegated last season, and they ended up finishing 7th and qualifying for Europe. They had a real lull mid-season, but either side, they were quite contrasting in terms of their process.
Yeah, I mean, Burnley were the mystery side. You know, Sean Dyche's a secret defensive. You know, that Tony Pulis used to master on in keeping teams up with. You know, by nicking the odd goal and you know, being very solid defensively. They were scoring around about a goal a game for about the first 15 games, whereas their expected goals were only about 0.6 a game. So they were nicking the lead, and they were tenaciously defending it. Whether that's a long-term process, novel tactics can give you an advantage. Whether it's a sustainable advantage or whether it's more transient, only time will tell. By the end, as you say, that they picked up points at the start of the season, they picked up points at the end of the season. In mid-season, you know, their results were that of a relegation threatened side. They've also got the added disadvantage potentially that they're playing in the Europa qualifying round, so they could get through to the group stages, and then you play Thursday and Sunday, so you get the shortest rest possible. You know, the Champions League play Wednesday and Sunday, you play Thursday and Sunday, so potential trips, you know, to Eastern Europe, short preparation time. We don't see Burnley repeating their performance from last year, and we look at them more as a 13th place side.
Absolutely, yeah. One team that might struggle this season is newly promoted Cardiff. They did very well. Many people really didn't fancy them to go up last season, and many were actually thought they didn't deserve to go up based on the performances, but that was not the case at all. According to the expected goals data, Cardiff were the second best team in the Championship last season and are well and truly deserved of their place in the top flight. Neil Warnock's side will find life tough this season for sure, though. What do they need to improve on in terms to keep up?
I mean, as you say, they did well. They created about 1.5 goals per game. They conceded about 1, although that trended upwards towards the end of the season, which isn't possibly the best profile to take into the Premier League. They certainly weren't at Wolves, but you know, they're a decent promoted side. Warnock, as you say, has you know, has managed all over the leagues, so you do know what you get with a Neil Warnock side. Last time Cardiff were in the Premier League, you know, they struggled. They had some good results, but you know, they ultimately went down. They're one of the favourites to go down again this time, and I don't think they've done any business particular that suggests that they've improved the squad. So a season of struggle, you know, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, definitely can see that. At the other end of the table are a team that are also going through a transition period, which is Chelsea. As expected by many, Antonio Conte was eventually parted company with Chelsea, and they brought in Maurizio Sarri, who has won a lot of people over with his displays as Napoli manager last season, especially Pep Guardiola. When they played each other in the Champions League, he only had nice words to say about Sarri. So it'll be interesting to see what direction he takes Chelsea in and whether he can improve their process. The process last season wasn't bad. It was the process of a top 4 Premier League team, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it was better at the start of the season, and you know, to about mid-season, and then the goals started to dry up, and the defence, you know, did start to rest slightly and be slightly less watertight than it had been earlier on in the campaign. They obviously weren't in the hunt really to contend with Man City, but they, you know, they're certainly the second echelon of top 6 sides.
Yeah, they need to get back in the top 4. Obviously, they'll be playing Europa League football this season, which may hamper that challenge. But they definitely got the players there and the process to make that a possibility. Another interesting side from last season was Crystal Palace. Everyone will remember that they didn't win a single point in the first 7 games, effectively giving all the teams around them a 7-game head start. Roy Hodgson came in and managed to turn things around quite quickly, and in the end they comfortably survived, with Infogol rating them as the 7th best team in the league based on performances over the course of the season. They deservedly stayed up, and it's very likely that they could go from strength to strength in this season.
It's always dangerous to suggest that teams who've improved from one campaign to the next are going to continue that improvement. As we say, there's a lot of variance involved in actual results compared to how you're actually playing. The start of the season was a typical example of that. Where they were creating chances and they weren't taking them, but at least they were creating chances. So if you do manage to manufacture chances, eventually, as happened with Crystal Palace, they will start hitting the back of the net. And they again had a bit of an up and down season. They didn't particularly finish well, although they had a good mid part of the season. They certainly look a solid mid-table side. Possibly to push on to Europe is probably a step too far, but they shouldn't really trouble the relegation positions this year. Yes.
Another team that is going through a transition period is Everton. After Sam Allardyce was brought in to steady the ship last season, Everton parted ways with him at the end of the season, and Marco Silva, their long-term target, has been brought in. It will be very interesting to see what he does with Everton. We've already seen him making signings. He's brought in Richarlison, one of his old players from Watford. It'd be interesting to see if he can get him playing to the level he was when they were both at Watford. But Everton as a team, they had a really poor 2017-18 campaign. They struggled to create chances throughout. How much of that was down to the manager and the style of play, or is that something that we can expect to continue under Marco Silva?
Well, I mean, if you looked at Everton's stats for virtually the first 30 games, it wouldn't have looked out of place as a team that was going to get relegated. They did manage to pick up points though when they needed it. The signings, as you say, they brought in Richarlison. He scored 5 goals for Watford. He was on the end of chances that possibly he could have scored 11. So there's certainly potential there to turn a goal scorer into actual returns in terms of goals scored. Sigurdsson, as we say, he was a dead ball specialist that cost probably slightly more than he should have done. So they've got the ammunition to at least create more goals than they were doing last year, which was running around about 1 goal per game, which isn't really going to break you into any of the Europa League places, and you are just going to be amongst the also rans within the division.
Yeah, like you said, that breaking into the European places will be Everton's and Marco Silva's aim, and it's fair to say they've got a lot of work to do on the process and the recruitment if they are to achieve that. A team that appears to be recruiting well is another promoted team, Fulham, who won the playoff final against Aston Villa last season. They've already made some interesting additions to their squad. They didn't start very strongly in the Championship, but they did get a lot better towards the end of the season, and in the end you could argue they deserved to get promoted.
Yeah, I mean, Fulham impressed us the previous season. They didn't particularly start well. They were scoring they were creating about as many chances as they were allowing, which isn't going to get you promoted. It probably isn't even going to get you in the top 6. But then in the second half of the season, everything clicked into position. They started creating better chances. They took them at a higher rate than you'd expect, and they'd started limiting chances, and they prevented those going in at a lower rate than you'd expect. So everything came together for them. They got promotion the hard way. They are, as you say, making some decent signings, and once you start keeping players who are sought after and attracting players, who other players see, expensive players going, you can then get a snowball effect and build up a decent squad. it's not to be underestimated though that the gap between the Premier League and the Championship is still wide, although
it's ever closing.
Yeah. I mean, it's possibly closed, but probably not as rapidly. And Fulham, are going to probably be in the bottom half of the table.
Yeah, I think they'd take that if you gave it them.
I'm sure every team outside of the top six would take being mid-table at the end of the season before a ball's kicked.
Absolutely. One team we're expecting not to finish in mid-table and finish lower is Huddersfield. Many people had them as the favourites to go down last season, and they defied those odds by surviving. David Wagner did an excellent job in keeping them up, but they were fortunate at the end of the day with their process. Was very much that of a relegation side. Yeah,
I mean, it was identical to Stokes and Swansea's. Huddersfield, they won the first game. They caught Crystal Palace in there at the start of their winless run. They then won the second game, so they got 6 points. After 2 games, which is always a nice start when you total. When you're aiming to get 35 points, and they managed to creep over the line. But they did particularly impress, and I'm not surprised to see them as favourites to go down.
Definitely, yeah. Moving on to a team that was mid-table side and that probably have aspirations of breaking into Europe themselves is Leicester. They had a really rocky start and ended up bringing in Claude Puel, who did steady the ship, and the process did improve under the Frenchman. One thing that could be crucial for them this year, though, is the loss of Riyad Mahrez, who's joined Manchester City. He was responsible for 15 expected goals last season, which was 27% of Leicester's total. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that loss and whether they can replace that input. What are we expecting from Leicester? Another mid-table finish, or do you reckon they could push into potentially a 7th place?
Leicester City, the former champions of the Premier League. As you say, they didn't start brilliantly. They improved substantially under the new management. If they need a warning scenario when you lose a large contributor, as you've said, Riyad Mahrez is. Stoke lost Shaqiri, who was their major provider of not only goals, also chances, as Mahrez is at Leicester, and they were relegated. So Leicester really do need to replace the large hole that Mahrez will leave with his departure. They were promising end to the season, but I don't particularly see them. They may challenge for Europe, but it is certainly a can we stay in the league scenario rather than can we push for Europe or repeat the glories of the past 3 years.
Yeah, one team that will not be thinking about relegation is Liverpool, completely the other end of the scale. They will have their eyes on pushing Manchester City all the way this season. They were very impressive last season, and they were perhaps unlucky to finish 4th, with them having a better process than both Tottenham and Manchester United. And if they can continue this process, they should definitely challenge Manchester City.
Yeah, I mean, Liverpool are the only side that were creating as many expected goals, per game as Man City were. Man City started off, hugely impressively around about 2.5, trended down to about 2, whereas Liverpool, maintained 2.5, two expected goals per game throughout the season. They also slightly improved the defensive side of the ball, particularly when Van Dijk turned up in the January window. Liverpool, I mean, they've recruited exceptionally well. They got all the firepower on board, so they're not just going one route to try and score more goals to win the title or be defensively strong to win the title. They've got a balanced plan that has prioritised both attack and defence, and they look. Statistically, they look easily the most similar side to Manchester City, and they were the only side that gave Man City difficult games, knocked them out of the Champions League, beaten twice. I see Liverpool. Obviously they were 25 points behind Manchester City, so it's a big gap to make up. But they are Manchester City's major rivals.
Yeah, you mentioned that they've signed well. One of them they brought in is Alisson Becker, the goalkeeper from Roma, a world record fee for a goalkeeper. He should make a huge difference to Liverpool. He's a big improvement on Loris Karius and Simon Mignolet. Will that give Liverpool another, decrease the gap even more to Manchester City?
Yeah, I mean, Liverpool probably have the best Brazilian goalkeeper in the Premier League, and Manchester City have the second best Brazilian goalkeeper in the Premier League. There's not a lot between them in shot stopping ability. They both build up from the back. They're both very comfortable on the ball, very good distribution. Alisson's distribution probably slightly better than Ederson's, so that obviously Klopp has assembled a squad to play how he wants, and it's taken a few years, but it does look as though he's got most of the pieces now in place, and it should be an exciting Premier League season, provided that Man City, Liverpool can rely on other teams to start taking points off Man City, and not just have to do it themselves.
That is the case, definitely. You mentioned Man City. Let's move on to them. They were very emphatic in the way that they won the title last season. They racked up 100 points, the first team ever to do that in Premier League history. They were just sensational, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you look at their attacking prowess, with all the weapons they have. De Bruyne, the potential player of the year, beaten by Mo Salah. The chances they create, Raheem Sterling, they had a huge array of attacking talent, but defensively they were just so difficult to create chances against. They allowed about half a goal a game, expected goals, mainly because teams couldn't get the ball off them. Their possession-based football was obviously also a defensive tactic, in that if teams haven't got the ball, you can't create. So they were the perfect. They were probably the most rounded, complete Premier League champions, of all time.
Yeah, they were really impressive. They averaged 1.57 expected goal difference per game across the season, which just shows how much of a gulf there was between them and their opponents. They're definitely the team to beat this time around.
They were what were they, 2-1 last year?
15-8 they were.
15-8.
To win the title, and you're not getting that price.
Very quickly disappeared.
Yeah, absolutely. A team that will be looking to push them closer this time round is their City rivals, Manchester United. They finished second, but according to the expected goals data, they were only the 6th best team in the league last year, with most of that as a result of David De Gea's fantastic overperformance last season.
Yeah, I mean, we say overperformance last season. He has been consistently doing it season on season. If you dropped an average shot-stopping goalkeeper into Manchester United's side, they would probably have a goal difference of about 0 compared to the second place finish that they managed to achieve with De Gea. It is just amazing how De Gea's performance depresses the amount of goals United actually concede compared to how many you would expect them to concede based on the chances they allow other teams to create against them.
And Manchester United, they got worse as the season went on in terms of process. Was that a result of just Mourinho deploying negative tactics to secure that top 4 finish, which was something that Man United as a club were desperate for?
I mean Mourinho probably relies on other teams to make mistakes so his team can win. They didn't create a lot of expected goals across the season. It started around about 2, just below 2, dropped below 1.5 by the end of the season. So they weren't creating a lot. Conversely, they weren't letting in a lot, and De Gea's overperformance ensured that they were picking up wins and results. And let's not forget they did beat Man City from 2-0 down, which takes some doing.
Yeah.
I mean United probably won't entertain, but they'll definitely be top 4.
You reckon? I was just going to make the point that they need to make improvements in their process if they are to make the top 4, because I think Chelsea will improve. Tottenham and Liverpool and Manchester City have all got a better process than Manchester United. So
if De Gea stays as De Gea has been over the last 3 years, they will make the top 4. If he doesn't, they will probably make the top 7.
So for Manchester United's sake, let's hope David De Gea turns up from the Premier League form and not his World Cup form.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we saw from the World Cup, even the best make mistakes, and if you were judging David De Gea on a small sample size of his World Cup performances, you wouldn't be paying record-breaking Alisson Becker type fees for.
Yeah, well, one team that is always in the news is Newcastle. There's a constant struggle between Rafa Benitez and Mike Ashley in terms of transfer fees, transfer budget as to what's available. But last season they performed as expected, which begs the question: does much need to change at Newcastle?
Yeah, they. It looks like a fairly nondescript season for them. You know, they stayed up fairly comfortably. Didn't quite look that way if you looked at their underlying performance at the halfway stage. They were, you know, conceding a lot of really high quality chances, and they weren't really making a lot for themselves. That gradually turned itself around. The defence got slightly better. The attack got fairly substantially better. And by the end of the season, you know, the attacking stats were trending slightly above the defensive ones, which is, you know, where obviously Newcastle, you know, would like to be. But it wasn't a straightforward season, and as you say, the off-field shenanigans and takeover talk and whatever probably doesn't help. Although they have an excellent manager.
Yeah, and one team that would love a season like that Newcastle had last season is Southampton. They found themselves in a relegation battle, and Mark Hughes came in. He did steady the ship, he did improve the process slightly, but the process is still that of a team that should be sat in the mid-table, and they were unlucky to be involved in a relegation battle.
Yeah, it was mainly sort of the not the early part, not the end part, the middle part that, you know, was the part of the season that cast them into a relegation struggle that they probably shouldn't have been in, although as we keep banging on about, any team outside the top six can find themselves relegated, you know, when you're only playing 38 games. It really turned into a, you know, more or less a winner-takes-all game against Swansea that Southampton, you know, won the battle of nerves. Hughes won't have to do much to improve them because they'd got a fairly decent process to start with. So if Southampton bounce back to, you know, the kind of performances that, you know, merited from, you know, their underlying performances that they've had in previous seasons, they'll be a mid-table side. And not a lot of credit really should go to Hughes because, you know, all the building blocks have been there, and you know they played a, you know, they shouldn't have been involved in a relegation scrap.
Yeah, we're not expecting them to be involved again this season. Expect a lower to mid half of the table finish for Southampton. A team that we'll be looking up is Tottenham. Again, they were very, very solid throughout the campaign and deservedly finished in the top four. They finished poorly in terms of process, but again, they were just so comfortable in gaining that top four finish. Do you reckon complacency came into it towards the end of the season?
Yeah, I mean, there's whether Harry Kane was, you know, carrying an injury or, you know, claiming to carry someone else's injury, I don't know, towards the end of the season, but certainly their expected goals process did drop off towards the end of the season, and the defensive one, you know, fairly flatlined all the way through. Tottenham have, you know, as you say, become an established Champions League contender. You know, you do expect them to be in the Champions League positions, whereas that obviously wasn't the case a couple of years ago. Their players played a huge part in England's World Cup campaign, so whether players come back with a World Cup hangover, you know, they'll be joining training late, you know, that may be a factor. Obviously Kane, you know, heightened his profile even more, although albeit mostly from the penalty spot. So, you know, there could be other clubs come calling that, you know, may disrupt Tottenham's equilibrium, shall we say. But yeah, look to be another solid finish for those.
Yeah,
certainly finishing above Arsenal.
It does seem to be that way again, more of the same. They might fall a little bit short in terms of a title challenge, but expect Tottenham to achieve a top four finish once again. Watford were another team that had a really indifferent season, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of turbulence. They finished the season with Javi Gracia in charge, and the process was not too bad. It was what you'd expect from a mid-table Premier League side. But there's plenty to improve on for Gracia, which I'm sure he'll be looking forward to trying to get more out of this side.
Yeah, I mean, the main problem at Watford was that they just couldn't really score enough goals. You know, they started off around about 1.2 goals, and you know they'd fallen to about just below 1 goal, per game by the end of the season. So they weren't a very creative side. They were fairly steady, albeit mid to lower half of the table defensively. They've lost Carlson, although he was on the end of a lot of their chances. He didn't actually convert a lot of them. So there will be hopefully chances being created that other players may get on the end of, and may finish at a more less extreme rate than Carlson and turn.
A team that finished in a similar position to Watford was West Ham. David Moyes did a very good job in keeping them up, having been in a relegation battle most of the season. Since then, they brought in Manuel Pellegrini, and it appears as though West Ham's owners are now spending money on some very interesting signings. They brought in Andrei Yarmolenko from Dortmund, who is a good prospect, Felipe Anderson from Lazio, who's a very good footballer. Jack Wilshere's obviously coming from Arsenal, which will provide them with something different in midfield. So there's every chance that they could make a vast improvement on what they managed to do last season, where the process really wasn't impressive.
No, I mean they will have to improve on last season. I mean, you say Moyes did a great job of keeping them up, but they were still flirting with possible relegation as late as May. They weren't very impressive defensively. They weren't very productive offensively. They relied on mainly on Arnautovic for creativity and for goals, and they were quite rightly still flirting with relegation towards the end of the season. Whether the investment pays off, they certainly need to improve.
Yeah, and finally, the team that's on everyone's lips at the moment is Wolverhampton Wanderers. They absolutely stormed the Championship last season, playing some great football on their way to winning the title. Everyone's been made aware of their transfer, the dealings and the way they've gone about it, with Jorge Mendes bringing in quite a lot of Portuguese players. And they've recently acquired 2 of Portugal's star players from the European Championship winning team. Rui Patricio, the goalkeeper, has been brought in, and so is João Moutinho. A lot is expected of Wolves. The process was very impressive last season. How high can they finish in the Premier League?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned Wolves in the Championship preview that they did finish the previous season to the one they won promotion impressively. So they were impressive in the chances they were creating, the chances they were allowing. They just weren't getting the results. So when the influx of money did come, it was coming into a team that was a lot better than their league finishing position the previous season suggested. So a very good setup, and money equals a very impressive Championship winning season, and they are one of the most impressive, statistically Championship title winning teams from the recent past. How that transfers into the Premier League, we'll have to see. The defensive process slightly tailed off towards the end of the season, where they were leaking a few more goals than they had been at their peak in mid-table, in mid-season, and their creativity also dropped off slightly. Whether that was, as you say, complacency, because they virtually got promotion, if not the title, wrapped up at quite an early stage. It'll be interesting to see how they get on. It's probably wise to judge them, on how they perform in the Championship, which would make them a mid to lower Premier League side, and just see how the results filter through and how the ratings alter as we start to acquire information about how they perform, in another level up.
Absolutely, they're definitely a team to watch, and that wraps up the team by team preview of the 2018-19 Premier League. Going into the best bets, so in terms of a winner, it's really hard to look past Manchester City. They were so good last season, not much has changed. If anything, they've strengthened, bringing in Riyad Mahrez, so they've got a bit of extra quality on the bench. Who can push them close?
Well, you don't need advanced statistics to suggest that Liverpool, are possibly going to be their main rivals. Any team that gets 100 points, they may not repeat that, but they're obviously an excellent side. So the benchmark is set very high. It's very difficult to see past Man City. I've heard people say that it's a toss-up between Liverpool and Man City, but the bookmakers tend not to agree, and Man City are still firm favourites, odds on, I would imagine.
Yeah, 4-6 they are, but there's definitely a potential there for a straight forecast bet. Manchester City first, Liverpool second, which could represent value. We do rank Liverpool as the second best team heading into this campaign, and based on performances last season. In terms of relegation, the team that is favourite at the moment is Cardiff, which is understandable given they've just come up. But a team that may represent a small amount of value is Huddersfield. As we've already spoke about, they were very fortunate to stay up last season. Perhaps they might not get the look that they had this season.
Yeah, I mean Huddersfield. I mean they're obviously one of the favourites to go down, but deservedly so. Cardiff coming up. If they spend money, wisely, they may not be as nailed on as you would expect. But Huddersfield profile of a relegated side, and I can't see any reason not to suggest at this time they won't be as lucky to find three poorer sides.
Yeah, and a team that's been trending in the wrong direction for a few years now, but with the results perhaps not reflecting that, is Bournemouth. And we are expecting Bournemouth to find life difficult this season, aren't we? This last season just gone, they were struggling to create chances on a regular basis, and they were conceding quite a few. They could easily find themselves embroiled in a serious relegation battle.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at potential teams to reproduce what other teams have done from previous years, you look at the quality of chances they're creating, the quality of chances they're allowing, and Bournemouth are allowing and creating chances very similar to Stoke and Swansea. So yeah, they look as though they would need to improve, and it looks a long hard season for Bournemouth potentially.
Yeah, there's potentially some value in there where the bookmakers making them only the fifth or sixth favourites to go down. In terms of a top goal scorer, Harry Kane, it's no surprise to see that he leads the market. He's around 13-5 to finish top goal scorer. But perhaps more value is Mohamed Salah, who won the Golden Boot last season. He's at 5-1, so it's a little bit of a better price. And given how well we're expecting Liverpool to do, they create chances on a consistent basis. It looks a sensible selection to go with Salah over Kane.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a top goal scorer, you need a top team, and so you can't look outside the top 3 or 4 sides, and then you look at their centre forwards or their main goal scorers. So yeah, it's a sensible call.
So that wraps up our Premier League preview. Well, let's hope for another exciting season and hope that the title race is a little bit closer.
Yeah, I mean the title race was virtually over by the third month of the season, so yeah, it would be nice if the interest wasn't just how many points Man City can get and can they get 100 again.
Yeah, absolutely. All the best bets are on screen now.